Welcome to another Founder Wisdom Pod PR edition. We've got the wonderful Courtney Lukitsch with us today. She is live from Florida, Miami, Florida today. Last time I spoke to her, she was near the beach in New York, in the Hamptons. I guess I'd call it that way. Travels a lot, well-traveled, cool person. I had various convos with her pre this podcast. So we're going to have a very cool conversation today about luxury, about PR, about coaching, and everything in between. This podcast is brought to you by podfire.com. If you want to start, scale, be invited to a podcast like this one. They're quite amazing to meet new people, make new connections, get leads, get clients. It's just a flywheel, in my opinion. So you can go to podfire.com. That is my podcast agency. Courtney, welcome to the pod. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself and a bit more about Gotham?
Yes, thanks, Charles. I'm very excited for your questions today because I could tell you're a brilliant interviewer, so I'm primed and ready. I started my agency over 20 years ago, and much like the recent past in New York City, the city was kind of in crisis right after 9/11. So there have been a lot of interesting inflection points, both in our world, technology, the boom bust around 2008, and then of course we know what happened in 2020. So yeah, it's always interesting as an entrepreneur, and particularly working with visionaries, to identify solutions and to forecast. So what we did, and as I counseled and coached all of my clients, which, at the time I think I had 30, and that's only multiplied, was to double down and concentrate our efforts on marketing, business development, and of course media. And all of those companies came out really way ahead in the past year. So I guess I'd like to say we're sort of the secret weapon behind a lot of smart people and companies that want to move and scale.
And it's not your first year doing that. I mean, 21 years, that's a lot of time. How did you first get in the game, in the entrepreneurial game? And how did you stay for 20 years?
Well, that's a good question. Resilience, I think, would be one key term that I would use. Prior to starting my own agency, I worked at 2 or 3 other firms in New York that were extremely, I'll use the word aggressive, proactive, right? Where I sort of honed my business development chops. And they were big names. We had really big name clients. And therefore, having succeeded there, I realized that I could do it on my own. And I think you've been in business for a while, so it's not always sort of rainbows and unicorns. There are a lot of challenges. You don't know what you don't know in the beginning, which is actually a blessing. It's a great thing because you're fearless when you first start your business and you have a very go for it attitude. Our initial clients at Gotham PR, again, were very big name global corporations and clients. So they entrusted us, and we were, effectively a startup. So that trust factor, I think, has always been paramount in building a client roster. And believe it or not, I've never solicited business once in 22 years of my practice. So somehow people find us by reputation, by referral, by research. One story I like to tell is a client, lovely Czech guy who started a film production and advertising business in New York City. He had a piece of paper, and on it in the margin said, "Call Courtney." He said he had no context for where that came from, who told him, but he called me. And of course, now we collaborate on a large scale. So anecdotally, I think it's really important to maintain a reputation, maintain integrity, and really provide a lot of value client side, right? For them to have that kind of faith to just pick up the phone and say, "Hey, I want your help with my business."
Love it. And what kind of services do you provide to what kind of folks?
Well, we have really refined a global practice dealing with art, design, architecture, real estate, emerging technology that, again, can be legacy businesses, but also startups. So typically people come to us for what's known in the marketing world as a roadmap, right? To take an audit of where they're at, sort of a pulse check to determine what we might leverage, right? In terms of media opportunities, new partnership relationships, which I personally enjoy. I find business to be very creative, and I love putting people together. None of our clients compete. So that, I think, is kind of a rarity, right? So they tend to, I'm a big fan of co-opetition, right? Rather than competition, because I think you get better results. And particularly when you're working in cities like New York and Miami, sort of everyone knows everyone at a very high level. So you're going to get sort of commensurate results when you create these business opportunities. So That's where I think we thrive. Obviously, the digital is a factor. We partner with social partners, and then, I have great designers and people who do UX and all the great sort of AI, which I know is an area that you have moved into in your own business. So I've always been on that sort of leading edge of technology and creativity. So again, work with a lot of really big minds, and I consider it a privilege, but it's never easy, right? Because those kind of clients have very high standards.
And how has PR changed, because the classic PR I really don't like. For example, like, hey, we'll get you this fake trophy on this fake cover, and we'll get people to talk about you. It's also like most firms, it's low ROI, it doesn't yield much. It's not super predictable. And it's more about vanity, which I mean is part of society. It's like branding and claiming to be something that you're not, which I mean, it can be bad, but it can also be good, right? That's how I keep on growing every day. I just visualize myself someplace and I get there, that's how us humans grow. But there's also like potential toxicity, potential pervasiveness to constantly claiming these titles. I see some kids nowadays and is like, I'm on Forbes, I'm on Inc., and they're all about vanity. They're all about book surface, and there's nothing in the book once you open it. They're not about doing, they're all about talking. So
right. Well,
have you
that's a
seen?
generational, divide. I'll just interject right there since you asked. I think the traditional definition, to your point, has changed, obviously, with the advent of influencers and purchased media, to your point, rather than earned media, right? So as a strategist at a very high scale, we're looking to partner with clients who, A, have that integrity. There's a lot of value to what they're doing. They're contributing to society. They're solving huge problems. For example, the architectural teams I just met with in New York City are designing almost pop-up solutions to the migrant crisis, which, if you follow the news, has really impacted New York City in a major way. So I always look at, what's the solution? What's the problem? How do we harness that, right, with the power of what these talents possess in my client roster? So that motivates me every day, right? So it's not just vanity. I mean, I understand the pretty pictures part and Instagram, and people want to be kind of reductive. I could have changed the name of the firm a long time ago, but it, again, by reputation, was so well branded. I meet people from all over the world, and I was like, oh, we like your brand. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. I never really even thought of it as a brand, but I guess after 2 decades, it is. So you don't want to break what isn't broken, right, by changing the name. No need to rebrand. But to your point, on the business development strategy side, we are adding a lot of value. And like you, I don't believe in a lot of puffy, soft sort of accolades or vanity press. So there's a difference between being a publicist, which is kind of old school PR, right, and that vanity promotion, which is around the movies and TV shows and, things like that. And it exists for a reason. And, we all still follow it and enjoy it. And then there's a difference, being a strategic marketer or business consultant, right? So that's really where we sit. It's just PR is easier for people to get their head around as a
Right,
term.
because there can be some ROI to PR, but the problem
There
with
is. There's a
these,
lot of KPIs actually, and that's something, I mean, I didn't answer fully your question, but the key performance indicators is something the metrics we can build in, the conversions of, for example, there's a client years ago, he's a builder, contractor, architect. He's sort of the, trifecta, does really beautiful, large scale, very famous, restaurants and salon spas, that kind of thing. And there was a large placement in the New York Times, and he said 3 years down the line, a huge law firm came to him and hired him for a $20 million project. And they saw that piece, and they could have hired anybody, but they hired him because of that article. So I would say that's a pretty good ROI.
Yeah, well, the point, I guess, is, for example, me, I'm all about cold email, but once someone knows about you through cold email, for example, they might Google you, and if they Googled you, if you pop out in that article that is real and authentic, they might click and they might give you more authority. Now, my point that I was about to make is that these kids, for example, the wrongness with that class of human that I've seen lately is that their parents always conditioned them to get the certificate, to go to Harvard, to have that prestige, to get that trophy, to get that grade. The whole point is missed, because in entrepreneurship, it's pretty much the other way around. It's all about doing, building, if you want to scale, that is. and titles and trophies are just distractions most of the time. Some of them are not, so some of them are quite cool and quite good. But yeah, just like a parenthesis here on all, if you're a kid, you're listening to this and you think that, you know, Harvard will make you someone in life, it won't. You know, it might give you like a network, and it might challenge you in some degrees, but yet like the trophy itself is not the destination. Now I want to talk about, yeah, the last point that we made on ROI and PR. One facet of podcasting, of PR that I am bullish about is podcasting. It's basically two humans having a genuine conversation, two humans that are fit together, that can exchange ideas. And before the client actually book a call with you, he can learn more about you. He can learn how you are, how you speak, and see if the values they fit, right? Before hopping on a sales calls with a stranger. They can also learn about your story, your business, your pricing, everything in between. So I'm very, very bullish on podcasting. Are you?
Yes, and I think, again, people who have the gift of verbal articulateness, which we both have, find this a very comfortable forum and exchange of ideas. And I'm all about ideas, big ideas, even small ideas, but it's all about the vision quest, right? So if you're not a big thinker and you're not a doer, then right, this arena is not for you in particular. But yeah, podcasts, I think, serve a really vital function. And let's face it, we're all always moving around, traveling. Podcasts and webinars are a really great way to learn things. And to your earlier point, I have clicked on some of the emails that you've shared with me, and I agree with you that correspondence and communication is an art form, and every thing that you disseminate or distribute should always be targeted. As I said, I've never sent out a cold call or email necessarily. And again, people who presume to reach me on back channels on LinkedIn or over email, who've never met me or done the diligence and then send me a calendar invite, you know, that's the first thing I hit is delete. So, you know, we're all busy, and I think it's very presumptuous for people to send you outreach without substance, right? So it just shows that they're not on the same level, because they're not respecting your time and sort of boundaries professionally. So yeah, it's very important to communicate with people in a very specific and effective way. Otherwise, you just lose their attention almost immediately.
Right. I have like the other flip side of that medal is that if you go, I mean, first start with a good offer, right? Like I think the podcasting is pretty much a good offer for pretty much everyone, because
Yes.
it's like, hey, I'm gonna put you on my platform, you're gonna promote me as well. This is win-win. I might grow some neurons in the process. Who knows, we might do business in 20 years. I mean, it's super duper win-win. And then I might even subscribe you to my newsletter, which is even more value added. Me, my philosophy is, yes, do not waste people's time. But for example, I wrote down my LinkedIn. I began sending an offer, which is like, hey, Courtney, I'll help you launch your podcast, right? And there's some AI in there, and I'm A/B testing the AI, which I can't really predict like how it would look like. And some of them, sometimes the AI is less than optimal. So I get one fuck off out of 10 yes. So well, 9 yes, right? So on 10. And if that's the case, I'll take the fuck off like any day, right? Imagine you get like 9 yeses per day and 1 out of 10 converts. And I do think genuinely that the starting your podcast offer is good for pretty much everyone, unless they already have their pod, and then it's like, scale your podcast. So yes, people need to check that. Me, what I don't like is I think the keyword you mentioned there is levels. So if you're like a basic account manager, like I don't think we'll be compatible, because I've been there like 7 years ago as an account manager, and I'm like level 2,900, you're probably level 11, and if I hop on a call, you'll be using like classic sales tactics, which I used to teach to people. I don't prone that anymore. I prone way more win-win, and that would be a waste of my time. Good example that is frequently happening in my life is that I use this software, right? I get an account manager. It's like, hey, Charles, let me help you. Well, let me tell you, they don't help me. Basically, they just try to sell me on more things. So I just talk to the CEO directly, and the CEO is like, hey, here's your free account. Help us promote. So yeah, salespeople, I do think they're gonna go extinct, let's call it in 10 to 15, or if they are, they'll convert themselves into customer support slash customer success positions. And I think this world will be fully product led. So companies that will grow to $1 billion really quick, it will be product led growth. What do you think about this?
No, I think it's a fascinating exposition. I think it's already happening in real time. To your point, going back to the top of the conversation, I find that people say yes more than they say no, depending on how you approach them, right? So it's really important to know that you get one chance to do it properly. And I think that's where sales falls flat. You know, the person that's going to keep sending it over and over and over, resending, you know, obviously you don't take them seriously, right? Just for a whole host of reasons that you just stated. So yeah, I mean, I think on the blockchain, I think on AI, even in the metaverse, all these things are happening. I mean, it is really interesting to try to stay apace with all of these developments. And, you know, obviously I have to keep my research instincts honed because we're working on everything from, you know, marine technology and saving the oceans and seas to master plans for the built environment, you know, in major cities or even, you know, out in the middle of the desert somewhere. So in order to work with that level of talent, again, the visionaries, then, you know, you have to embrace that and be one yourself. I'm not claiming to be one per se, but I can get in a room with a lot of really smart people and hold my own. So again, I think that's sort of a rare capacity for not only most CEOs, but somebody working on a global scale. So it's a kind of a unique proposition and offering.
Yeah, your clients are, I mean, you select top clients as well. I think, but I mean, you won't accept like a crypto client doing ICOs, scam shit,
No,
you know, like a bunch of
no,
PR agencies would. And that's,
right.
I think, one thing that strongly distinguishes you. It's really high quality work as well. You're like really cerebral as a person. Were you always that way?
Well, it's interesting because like you and everyone coming up through the business, right? You have to go through all the different paces. I really feel like I've worked on every segment of industry almost at this point, everything from, you know, healthcare. I haven't worked in pharmaceuticals, but, you know, fintech, all kinds of tech. You know, I was in tech for well over a decade. So, I mean, that's a really, that's like boot camp, right? So being around great engineers and information architects really kind of informed that, you know, it's like your mind is sort of like a matrix, right? With a lot of different compartments and categories. And people always say, how can you retain all that information? But you train yourself, right? It's like you're training for your marathon. You go up through various levels. So yeah, I figured out pretty early on what I did want to do versus what I didn't want to do. So anytime somebody says the word publicist, I immediately like, no, that's not what we're doing. And then I know automatically it's not for me. And sometimes we do have to release ourselves from contracts with clients who just don't understand that, right? So sometimes somebody's really great and you're really getting along, you sign a contract, and then the next day they kind of turn into a little bit of a monster. And that's when we realize, you know, I'm pretty good at honing in, like I have a radar for that at this point, and also a pretty strong vetting process. But you'd be surprised that, you know, it still can happen. So
Do you also
yes, I
help
think
clients once they like get into deep waters, once they get into
yes,
trouble?
crisis, we call that crisis communication. And I have to say, the past few years, there's been a fair amount of that. And everything from providing legal counsel to strategizing right at the press level. Everybody, of course, wants to fight things out in the press. I tell them often it's much more advantageous to keep it out of the press. So there's always, that's the coaching part, right? Is teaching people maybe not to get in their own way, bigger picture, and how to circumnavigate issues before they arise. And that obviously requires a lot of experience, finesse, and a great network. I always surround myself with experts. So when I need somebody outside of my immediate company for services or consultation, I have that established. So I think then I can deploy that on behalf of the client. And of course, it's a pretty fast solution rather
Right.
than, you know, a blow up.
Right. I think some individuals, you know, they'll never change and they constantly get into trouble. But I do
Yeah.
see a lot of value in protecting people with good hearts that have got into bad situations because of circumstances, especially if they can learn from that. So I'm a strong believer in that. Where can people find out more about you, Courtney?
Sure. I think LinkedIn is pretty comprehensive. I do have a book coming out called Creating Significance, and it's about building a brand and a legacy, not dissimilar to what we've been talking about and what you yourself are endeavoring. And it's case studies really of various clients where they started and where they are now. And almost to a person, they are very successful and continue to be. So my hope is always to motivate a new generation of entrepreneurs. I bootstrapped. I never took money for any kind of investment and have been able, you asked a question earlier, to survive because you expand and you contract, right? Based on economic cycles. So it's never sort of a straight line, or at least in my experience, it has not been. But I feel like I'm doing my best work I've ever done. And in my industry, it's like your latest and greatest is always sort of what defines you, right? Somebody's not going to look back to 20 years ago. I mean, some clients have done that like in the entertainment industry, but as I like to say, if you're good and you're expert at what we do, you should be able to promote or grow or strategize pretty much in any segment, right?
Right. Agree with that. Nice. Fun one, Courtney. Thank you for showing up today. I'm Charles Cormier, host of founderwisdompodcast.com. If you want to start, scale, be invited to a podcast, that would be my podcasting agency, podfire.com. That was Courtney Lukitsch.